He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Can your stepkids force you to sell your house to pay them out if their parent dies? What is the Cullen Fund for anyway? And how feasible is a tiny home dream? Those are some of the questions we're discussing on this week's episode of No Stupid Questions. I'm Susan Edmunds, RNZ's money correspondent, and I'm joined today by Justin Gregory.
I'm a stepkid. I'd never do that to my step-parent. Clearly morally superior to the people in this question.
We'll start off with a bit of judgment and we'll go from there. We've got lots of questions this week. Let's get into it.
Right. Our first question is from a woman who's worried about her home and savings, which she says she jointly held with her partner who's died, and she's asked if we can not use her name for obvious reasons. She says she invited her partner's far-flung adult children and adult grandchildren to the funeral, and her own grandchild overheard them talking about a legal claim to force her to sell her home for their benefit. She says, my partner and I registered it as our joint family home when we built it 3 decades ago, and it took me more than 2 decades to care for my non-working partner and pay off the mortgage. That's hard. That's difficult. I'm fit, I'm well, I live in my home, my friends, children, grandchild and activities are all nearby. I'm extremely upset by their claims, as are my own children. Can my stepkids legally force me to sell my home to provide money for them?
I've heard variations of this question before, so I went to check with Michelle Pope, who's Principal Trustee at Public Trust. She says this highlights some of the complexities that can happen when you're dealing with an estate in a blended family. She says, first up, you're right to get legal advice. Generally speaking, assets held in joint names, like the house and savings that we're talking about here, will automatically pass to the surviving joint owner. But she says it's important to confirm whether the property is legally owned jointly or in equal or unequal shares. If it's jointly owned, it will in most cases pass directly to the surviving owner through what's called survivorship in legal language and will not form part of the deceased person's estate.
That's a hell of a word, survivorship.
Yes, we'll chalk that one up for the glossary. And if not, the deceased share will need to be administered as part of their estate, which can add complexity. So some people who are in second marriages with separate children own their property with structures like being tenants in common. So you each have your bit that's set aside to eventually go to your kids, but you will know whether that's the case for you. So moving to the question about whether your stepchildren can force you to sell the home. Michelle says not directly, no. However, there are some complex circumstances which can arise. One example is that your partner's estate may make a claim to claw assets back into the estate, which may then be subject to a legal claim from your stepchildren. So an example could be if they believe they haven't been adequately provided for in their father's will. If they're successful, selling assets might be an outcome of any legal decision, she says. She says it's great to hear that your partner had a will because this can provide clarity around his wishes for his assets and who he wanted to benefit. I think we're assuming it's a man here, so I'm sorry if it's not. And she says having a will can help reduce the risk of legal disputes and give clarity for families, but can't prevent claims being made.
Families, huh? Families and grief. It's just complicated.
Yeah, it is difficult.
I should have made my little moral judgment early on, but, there we go.
I think these sort of situations bring out the worst in people, honestly.
Everything brings out the worst in me. Let's carry on.
So Michelle says blended families are increasingly common and estate planning in these situations can be complex. Evidently. She says she strongly recommends people seek professional advice to explore their options and ensure that your estate plan reflects your intentions.
Best of luck to you. All right, a question that is probably dear to the hearts of many parents around the country, and dear in the sense of expensive. James in Wellington wants to know, why isn't the cost of childcare tax deductible when it's an essential expense that allows me to work longer hours and earn more money? If I didn't pay for childcare, I simply couldn't do my job. So why is it treated differently from other work-related costs? Good question, James.
Yes, I know a lot of people who feel as though they're sometimes just working to pay for daycare, but I promise it does end. Our tax friend Robin Walker at Deloitte says this is similar to a question I dealt with in my written column recently from someone who wanted to know why her rent couldn't be a tax deductible expense. So basically it just comes down to you can't get tax breaks for things that are determined to be private spending, even if it is in the course of making some income. She says to a certain extent the government already recognises the spillover benefits of ECE, which is why they subsidise ours and have introduced Family Boost. So this is a more efficient form of government support, she says, than forcing people to put it through their tax returns. And I guess that is true. As long as you meet the income threshold, you can make a claim for Family Boost and get some of it that way.
But it was worth a crack, James. Fair play to you. Megan says she was listening to our discussion recently about pensions, one of many discussions about pensions on this podcast, namely that they're paid for by taxpayers of the day, not paid for in advance by taxpayers for use when they get to pension age. She says that prompted her to think of the Cullen Fund. Megan wants to know, will pensions be paid entirely from the Cullen Fund from 2030 onwards, or will the fund just partly supplement pension payments? And as an aside, Megan wonders why there's always this talk of raising the age of entitlement to the pension when this fund was supposedly set up to future-proof pension payments. And maybe in 2030 the pension rate might even be raised to reflect the cost of living. Megan also wonders why similar funds were not set up for health, but that's probably a question for politicians or another podcast.
Yes, indeed. So the Cullen Fund is probably more widely known as the New Zealand Super Fund, and she's correct that it was set up to help with the future cost of pensions, because we're heading for a situation where by the time you and I ever retire, Justin, if we're ever allowed to, we'll have more old people compared to working taxpayers than we do today. So the government's investing to help cover that cost. But maybe we'll be doing No Stupid Questions, episode 9,000,003 or something.
And still talking about pensions.
Probably. But drawdowns are intended to start from sometime next decade. It's not going to fully fund them, though. The pension costs the country about $24 billion a year. The New Zealand Super Fund is at about $85 billion now. So the intention is to help, but other changes to settings will be needed.
Because that's only going to pay for, 3 and a bit years at the most?
Yeah, that's right. Some big numbers there. I talked to Shamabil Yaqub, who's chief economist at Simplicity, about this, and he says it's helpful to remember the political history of the fund.
The reason why it was set up was to help us transition.
Right.
So people forget the history of it, the politics of it. When Michael Cullen set it up, his whole thing was we're going to build this KiwiSaver, which will mature over time. But there will be a period where we will have to have New Zealand Super as it currently is before we move to a means tested or whatever. And the Super Fund, it was meant to be run down over that period, that transition period, to help us manage that period.
A spokesperson for the fund says by the 2070s or 2080s, the combination of withdrawals from the fund and tax paid by the fund is projected to cover about a fifth of the cost of New Zealand Super. And that's assuming there are no other policy changes or anything like the age of eligibility going up, that sort of thing.
Now, one from Lynn, who says she's on a benefit. She's 62 and single. She has no money at all, just $1,300 in KiwiSaver. She wants to have a tiny home and freehold a bit of land. Is there any way that Lynn can do this, Susan?
This is such a good dream, but I can't immediately come up with a solution for Lynn. I had a hunt around online and I found some sections in places like Gisborne that you could get for about $50,000 potentially. That wasn't meant to sound judgmental about Gisborne, by the way. I think it came out a bit like I was casting aspersions. I'm sure Gisborne's a lovely place to live. But maybe you could negotiate a bit on that price, but then you'd probably need a deposit of about 20% of that to get a loan from the bank because they are a bit more nervous about land, and you'd need income to service that debt. Then you've got to buy or rent the tiny home that goes on it, and I see those usually start at about $20,000 at a bare minimum, depending on how much DIY you are willing to do. Then they can be a lot more than that too. So I don't think there's an easy answer here with your current situation. Sorry, Lynn. But maybe if any listeners have any ideas in a non-scammy way, they could get in touch with us. And I would normally suggest you save as hard as you can to get a deposit, but there's an important trade-off that we've talked about in the past, that if you hit $8,000 in assets, you won't get the accommodation supplement. And if things are as tough as they sound like they might be, that's could be something that you're relying on. So I'm sorry, Lynn, she said it was a stupid question, and it isn't. I just can't give a good solution.
All right, Glenn asks, with the government's depositor compensation scheme now in place, I've never heard of the depositor compensation scheme, what is the advantage for a small investor having money invested in Kiwi Bonds, I've never heard of Kiwi Bonds either, as opposed to putting it into a bank term deposit and receiving a higher interest rate? And Glenn says the advantage of Kiwi Bonds prior to the DCS, the Depositor Compensation Scheme, was that deposits were government guaranteed and bank deposits weren't, as he sees it. Susan, what's a Kiwi bond again?
Kiwi bonds are bonds issued by the government. So basically, you're lending money to the government. They're paying about 2.5% in interest a year for 1-year bonds at the moment. So they're super secure, but they're not really giving all that much a return.
Righto. And the depositor compensation scheme.
That's the new scheme where if a bank or finance company or whatever fails, people who have savings or transaction accounts or term deposits with that organisation can be compensated up to $100,000. I asked Dean Anderson, who's founder of Kernel, what he thought of Glenn's question. And he says even with the depositor compensation scheme now in place... DCS, yes, that'll save me a breath. It doesn't mean that Kiwi bonds and savings accounts or term deposits are suddenly the same thing. He says Kiwi bonds are still a direct claim on the New Zealand government, which some people value for the peace of mind that they get, even if the rate is lower. A term deposit or an on-call savings account will pay more usually, but you're making that trade-off of risk versus return. It's also worth noting that while the DCS is a great safety net, he says it's good to remember it's a compensation scheme, not a guarantee of instant payout. So if there was a bank failure, which we all cross fingers there's not, you'd likely still have a lock-in period while the payout is processed, whereas Kiwi bonds are backed directly by the Crown from day one. So he says for most savers, it's not just about the headline rate, it's the constraints too. How easy is it to access your money? What are the minimums? Are you locked in? Are there penalties to break? And is the rate fixed or floating? Ultimately, he says New Zealanders have billions of dollars sitting in savings account and term deposits. There's a massive opportunity for them to boost their returns just by taking a moment to look at what else is on the market.
Which you did, didn't you? You've been looking into savings accounts recently.
I have been, and it was a very disappointing experience. I looked at the lowest interest rates being offered, and some of them were really low, like 0.05% low.
How's that okay?
It's pretty bad considering inflation's up at about 3%. There were lots paying 0.1%. People stay with them though. I think it's partly because they can't be bothered moving, or they even just maybe don't realise how little they are getting.
All right then, so what are your options if you have savings in a bank?
Check the rate you're getting, then look at what's on offer. And if you have a chunk of money that you might not need for a while, have a think about whether it really is best in a savings account, because you might get a better return in a term deposit or even a managed fund. My usual refrain though, if you're not sure, get some personalised financial advice from someone who is qualified to give it, not us.
In the last episode, we asked you all about Lego.
Yes, we wanted to know what kind of return you think you can get investing in Lego. It turns out it's not just for leaving around the house and annoying your mother, as the people around me seem to believe. Gertjan Verdict, who's a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland.
Say that name again.
Nope, not doing that one again.
Good on you.
He's actually studied this. He says an investment in Lego could give you a return of about 8.8% a year gross.
So the stuff I've got in a box in my kids' playroom?
I don't think so. He tells me that the value does not go to zero when it's opened, but there's a premium on unopened Lego.
And what about the stuff that the puppy chewed on?
Well, maybe if your puppy becomes famous, it will get like an additional premium.
All right. So probably not on your average, ordinary, everyday set of Lego, but maybe if you've got a good one still in the box and in good shape. No puppy involvement at all. Now, our audience question for this week relates to UB40. Go on then, Susan. What?
Yes, I took up a last-minute invitation to join my friends on an outing to UB40 last week, which prompted you to look at when that band first travelled to New Zealand.
Yeah, it turns out it was 1981. Big year, that one. Didn't realise UB40 was part of it.
So maybe we will be doing No Stupid Questions till we're 103. But it got me thinking, what was New Zealand like in 1981? So we're asking this week, what was the average house price in 1981 and what was the average salary? I have a feeling I'm going to find out that I'd have been better to be buying houses in 1981 rather than being busy not being alive.
I was alive, but I wasn't thinking about buying houses in 1981. But I'm from Twizel, and in
Slacker.
1981, I could have bought a house there. 3 bedrooms, quarter-acre section for about $5,000. I should have got a mail round, saved up my money and bought a house in Twizel. I'd be killing it now.
Just imagine you being, I don't know how old you would be, but doing a mail run and
9.
going home to your house.
Yeah. In Twizel.
Yeah, that's right.
Rocking up to my house on my bike, freezing cold in a Twizel winter. All right, send your answers to the question about house prices in 1981. And how nice Twizel is generally, because I love it. Send your answers as well as any money questions you might have to questions@rnz.co.nz and we'll have a crack at them.
Bye for now. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds was written and presented by Susan Edmunds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. The engineer is Phil Benj. Thanks to James, Megan, Lynn and Glenn for their questions, and Michelle Pope, Robin Walker, Shamabil Yakub, Dean Anderson and Getkan Verdict for their answers. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode.